She was fired minutes before a multi-billion-dollar deal was signed. 8 seconds later, the deal collapsed live on screen. What followed exposed a truth no one in the room was prepared to face. The dismissal landed one breath before history was supposed to be signed. The room froze, as if someone had cut the power to gravity itself. Evelyn Cross stood at the end of the glass table, pen hovering, the luminous contract pulsing on the wall behind her. Outside the windows, Singapore shimmered with mid-morning heat, towers of steel and ambition reflecting a future already priced, already sold, inside. The air was thin. Cameras waited. Investors smiled the way people do when they believe the ending is guaranteed. At 9:17 in the morning, Marcus Vail cleared his throat. "Evelyn," he said, voice polished and warm, "your role concludes here." The sentence was soft. Its impact was not. For half a second, no one moved. The pen trembled in Evelyn's fingers. Somewhere near the ceiling, the projector hummed, suddenly loud, suddenly exposed. The board members studied the table as if the wood grain held answers. They preferred not to speak aloud. Julian Rowe, the newly crowned strategist, kept his eyes fixed on the glowing company seal, jaw tight, rehearsing relief. Evelyn did not ask for clarification. She did not raise her voice. She had spent 12 years learning the sound of inevitability. The security badge clipped to her jacket emitted a dull chime. On the wall, beneath layers of legal language no one in the room had written, a line of system text flickered and vanished. Author verification pending. No one else noticed Evelyn did. Marcus gestured gently toward the door, a man ushering a formality out of his way. "We'll proceed without interruption." Without her. To the investors, the moment registered as administrative housekeeping. To Julian, it felt like the final lock clicking into place. To the junior counsel at the far end of the table, it was a lesson delivered early. Do not look at the person being erased. Evelyn set the pen down with care. The sound was small, deliberate, louder than it should have been. She straightened her jacket, smoothing fabric over a heart that did not race. Panic would have been easier. Panic would have meant surprise. This was recognition. 12 years earlier, Orex Systems had been a cracked floor and borrowed servers, 9 people arguing over instant noodles and unfinished code. Evelyn had been the youngest in the room then, underestimated before she spoke, trusted only because no one else knew how to make the system behave. She learned early that power rarely announces itself. It embeds. It waits. Marcus remembered those years differently. He remembered vision. He remembered speeches. He remembered his own reflection in glass. Now he watched Evelyn with polite detachment, already stepping into the version of the story where she was a footnote. "Security will escort you after the signing," he said. Professional final. Evelyn nodded once. Words would have changed nothing. She gathered her notebook, the leather worn smooth by nights that smelled of cold coffee and ozone. She did not look at Julian. Julian felt the absence like a bruise anyway. As she turned, the contract behind them scrolled forward, lines aligning, the system preparing for execution. To everyone else, it was a ceremony warming its engines. To the machine, it was a question. Does the author still exist? In the corridor, the lights felt harsher, reflections fractured across polished floors, each one a version of a life she had given to the architecture of other people's success. A junior analyst whispered her name as she passed. Too late to matter, too early to forget. Evelyn did not slow. Inside the boardroom, the tempo shifted. Marcus's smile widened. Julian exhaled. The cameras refocused, hunger returning. The future was back on schedule. They did not see the small notification appear on a private server beyond their network. A quiet acknowledgement, written in a language only one person in the building had ever taught it to speak. They did not hear the internal clock begin its count, calm and exact. Evelyn reached the elevator and waited. Her reflection met her gaze, steady, unbroken. Somewhere behind the glass, the men who believed they had removed her leaned toward a victory they did not understand. She knew what they thought of her, architect, operator, replaceable. They were wrong in a more dangerous way than they could imagine. As the doors slid open, Evelyn stepped inside, carrying nothing visible, but leaving everything that mattered exactly where it had always been. The system she built did not belong to titles or ceremonies. It belonged to truth. And truth, once asked the right question, never forgets who taught it to answer. The company almost collapsed before anyone learned her name. They survived because she stayed. 12 years earlier, the building had smelled like damp concrete and burnt coffee. Rain leaked through a ceiling patched with optimism and tape, dripping onto humming servers no one trusted yet. 9 people worked there then, arguing loudly, dreaming quietly, all of them convinced they were temporary, all except her. She arrived before dawn and left after the cleaners. She did not announce herself. She fixed what broke. When systems failed, she listened to the silence between errors, the places where logic frayed and truth hid. While others chased titles, she chased stability. While others sold vision, she built infrastructure. Most of them thought she was support staff. They were not cruel about it. They were simply blind in the way people are when competence does not demand applause. The chief executive remembered those early days as chaos. He liked to tell the story at dinners, how he had fought banks and doubt, how his vision alone had kept the company alive. He never mentioned the nights when he slept while she rewrote the compliance framework line by line, hands shaking from caffeine and resolve. He never mentioned the moment the servers finally purred instead of screamed, the night the system became trustworthy. He shook her hand once after that milestone, a quick squeeze, a promise delivered like a compliment, your name will be on everything we sign. He meant it metaphorically. She took it literally. As the company grew, the offices changed. Glass replaced drywall. Silence replaced laughter. She moved from shared desks to a private office without asking for it. People assumed it was because she needed quiet. The truth was simpler. The system followed her, and the system required distance. She learned the language of audits. She learned how regulators think, how fear hides inside footnotes, how shortcuts rot quietly until they cost billions. When the first major contract arrived, the one that could have broken them, she was the only one who understood how fragile legitimacy really was. She saved it. No applause, no email, just another meeting scheduled on top of the night she had not slept. Her father died during the third expansion. The call came while she was reviewing a data integrity report that would decide whether the company could operate in 3 additional countries. She stared at the screen long after the words stopped making sense. She told herself she would leave after one more section, one more fix, one more safeguard. By the time she arrived at the hospital, the room was quiet. The machines had already stopped asking questions. At the funeral, colleagues sent messages about deadlines. They meant well. They always did. She returned to work 2 days later and did not speak about it again. This was how loyalty calcified, layer by layer, sacrifice disguised as professionalism. People noticed her less as she became more essential. New hires did not know what she did, only that systems never failed when she was nearby. Executives called her dependable. Dependable was a word that made people comfortable forgetting you. She began to understand the shape of power then. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that sits underneath everything, invisible until removed. The first twist came years before the boardroom dismissal, though no one recognized it as such. During a late-night update, she embedded a subtle authorship trace into the compliance architecture. It was not defensive, it was memorial, a way of leaving proof that she had existed in the machine, even if memory failed. She told no one, not out of secrecy, but out of clarity. Systems do not need witnesses to remember. From that night on, every contract the company generated carried a silent signature, folded into metadata no one read. It did not grant ownership. It did not trigger alerts. It simply stated truth in a language only the system understood. She did not see it as power. She saw it as balance. Others saw her as careful, as loyal, as safe. When the company crossed its first billion in valuation, champagne flowed in rooms she was not invited into. The chief executive thanked everyone on stage, naming teams, naming leaders. Her name was not spoken. She watched the broadcast from her office. Lights off, server glow painting the walls blue. She did not feel anger then. Only recognition. This was how erasure begins. Not with betrayal, but with omission. The younger executives learned quickly. They learned that ideas traveled upward without attribution. They learned that credit followed volume, not truth. They learned to smile through meetings where her work was rebranded under louder voices. She let them. Because beneath the surface, the system had already learned her shape, her logic, her restraint. They believed she was a builder, not an owner. A technician, not an architect. They believed loyalty meant permanence. They did not understand that permanence belongs to structure, not people. When she walked through the company in those years, she felt both invisible and indestructible. A ghost in plain sight, a foundation mistaken for floor, and somewhere deep inside the network, something waited, quiet, patient, unimpressed by titles. She did not know yet who would try to erase her. She only knew that when they did, the system would remember what they chose to forget. Because long before they questioned her value, she had already written it into the bones of their success. The first warning appeared at 12:43 in the morning, then erased itself. By the time anyone noticed, it was already too late to pretend it had never been there. The office was empty when the system breathed differently. Not louder, not broken, just wrong in a way only its creator could feel. She paused mid-step, hands still hovering above her keyboard. The air around her thick with the low hum of machines that never slept. The others would have missed it. They always did. To them, technology either worked or failed. To her, it spoke. She leaned closer to the screen. The access log refreshed. A single entry pulsed faintly before settling into place. Authorized credentials. Core directory off schedule. Not hers. For a moment, she assumed fatigue. It had been a long week of audits and investor prep, too many hours folded into one another. She blinked, reloaded the log, watched the timestamps align themselves with perfect, unsettling calm. Someone had entered the heart of the system after midnight. Someone who did not belong there. She sat back slowly, listening to the servers breathe. In the days that followed, the pattern repeated. Always late, always precise, files duplicated, renamed, cleaned of authorship markers, as if someone were wiping fingerprints they did not realize were already permanent. The work was clumsy, efficient, but careless. Like watching a stranger try to speak a language they did not understand, mimicking sounds without grasping meaning. By the third night, she stopped hoping it was an error. The new strategist had arrived weeks earlier, all confidence and charm, introduced as the future of the company. He laughed easily in meetings, spoke loudly about innovation, sprinkled buzzwords over ideas that had been old before he learned to pronounce them. People liked him. People always liked noise. He did not see her when he passed her door, or perhaps he did, and dismissed what he saw as harmless. That was the mistake. She confronted the chief executive the next morning. His office smelled of polished wood and control, a place designed to reassure visitors that nothing unexpected could survive there. She explained calmly that restricted directories were being accessed. She showed him the logs, the timestamps, the missing attribution. He barely glanced at the screen. He smiled instead, the kind of smile meant to soften inconvenience. He told her not to worry. He said the new strategist was learning the system. He said learning required access. Learning, she thought, did not require erasure, but she nodded. She always nodded. He was already turning back to his email, already done with the conversation. That night, she stayed long after the lights dimmed. The building settled into its after-hours quiet, a silence that carried secrets more honestly than daylight ever had. She opened the master framework, scrolling past lines she knew better than her own handwriting. This was not paranoia. This was confirmation. If someone intended to remove her from the narrative, they would start by removing her from the code. So she changed the rules. She did not add alarms. She did not create warnings. Drama would have exposed her intent. Instead, she wrote a sentence so ordinary it dissolved into the architecture like it had always been there. Primary author required for validation? It was not a tag. It was not a lock. It was a truth condition. Invisible to interfaces, indistinguishable from logic. If anyone attempted to strip authorship from a document, the system would not protest. It would simply refuse to proceed, quietly, permanently. She tested it once, then again. Each time, the system responded with serene indifference. It accepted the condition as fact. Her hands shook only after she closed the window. From that night on, every file the intruder touched carried the line forward, replicating itself like a heartbeat. He believed he was rewriting history. He was engraving hers deeper into the structure. Others sensed nothing. Meetings continued. Deadlines advanced. The strategist grew bolder, speaking as if the system were already his. The chief executive praised speed. The board praised confidence. They praised the wrong things. She walked the halls with a new awareness, then, not fear, clarity. The system no longer felt like a tool she maintained. It felt like a witness, watching, remembering. In her private office, she reviewed the logs with clinical detachment, names times patterns. She was not angry. Anger would have clouded precision. This was something colder and far more durable. Preparation. They still saw her as dependable, as loyal, as the person who would quietly clean up after ambition ran ahead of understanding. They did not realize she had stopped protecting the company. She was protecting the truth. The twist was not that she could destroy them. The twist was that she did not need to. All she had done was ensure that nothing built on her work could exist without acknowledging its origin. Power, she understood now, did not come from exposure. It came from inevitability. As she shut down her terminal that night, the servers continued their steady hum, indifferent to titles and plans. Somewhere within their layered logic, a condition waited silent, patient absolute. When they finally tried to erase her, the system would not scream. It would simply stop pretending she had never been there. The applause began before the theft was complete. That was how she knew it was no longer accidental. Morning light flooded the executive floor, turning glass walls into mirrors of ambition. In the largest conference room, voices overlapped with optimism, charts rising and falling on screens as if confidence alone could bend reality. The strategist stood near the center now, speaking with practiced ease, hands carving the air as he outlined a future that sounded remarkably familiar. She listened from the edge of the room, still unreadable. Every sentence he delivered carried echoes of her work, stripped of origin, polished for display. He spoke of resilience without mentioning the nights it took to build it. He spoke of safeguards without understanding what they guarded. The board nodded. The chief executive smiled. Momentum had chosen its messenger. In the system, the copies continued. They appeared clean to anyone glancing quickly. Names removed, timestamps adjusted just enough to suggest authorship drifted naturally, like credit always does. The strategist was careful now, more careful than before. He had learned where not to look. He had learned that silence could be mistaken for consent. She knew better. Between meetings, she returned to her office and closed the door. The glass dimmed at her touch, privacy frosting into place. On her screen, the audit trail stretched backward like a spine, each vertebra aligned by cause and consequence. She followed it calmly, not chasing, not reacting. Watching. The pattern had matured. He no longer copied entire files. He extracted logic, reassembled it under a new banner, presented it as insight. The chief executive praised initiative. The board praised speed. She felt no heat rise, no rush of blood, just the tightening clarity that comes when a line is crossed with intention. At lunch, the strategist laughed too loudly at a joke that did not deserve it. Colleagues leaned in, eager to belong to the sound of success. He spoke of legacy, of ownership, of taking the company somewhere new. When he mentioned the system, his words skimmed the surface, confident and hollow. She watched his reflection in the glass. He looked taller there, bigger, more certain than he was. That afternoon, she requested a brief meeting with the chief executive. He waved her in without looking up, fingers already moving to the next message, the next urgency. She explained, again, that core logic was being repackaged, that attribution was being erased, that the system was not a toy. He sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced by detail. He told her not to be territorial. He said collaboration meant letting go. He said growth required trust. Trust, she thought, was not blind. She left without arguing. Argument would have made this emotional. Emotion would have weakened the edge. The strategist passed her in the hallway minutes later. He stopped, smiled, asked if everything was all right. His concern was well rehearsed. His eyes did not wait for an answer. That was the moment she saw it clearly. Not just ambition, replacement. The quiet, corporate kind. The kind that does not attack you directly, but slowly removes the evidence that you were ever necessary. That night, she stayed late again. Not out of habit, out of choice. The building emptied. The city dimmed. The servers continued their steady breathing, indifferent to promotions and plans. She opened the master framework and reviewed the conditions she had set weeks earlier. They remained invisible, patient untouched. She added nothing new. Instead, she mapped the strategist's path. Every access, every alteration, Every mirrored file now carried the same truth condition, quietly embedded, multiplying without resistance. He could not remove it without understanding it. He did not understand it. The twist was simple. The more he took, the deeper her authorship embedded itself into what he believed he owned. She closed her eyes briefly and listened to the hum. This was not revenge. Revenge would have required witnesses. This was alignment. Across the building, the strategist celebrated another small win, a nod from the chief executive, a compliment from the board. He believed he was consolidating power. He believed proximity equaled control. He did not know that the system now recognized him only as a carrier. In the days that followed, the tone shifted. Meetings where she once spoke grew shorter. Invitations thinned. Decisions were made without her. She was thanked in passing, deferred in practice. The erasure advanced politely. She did not resist. Because beneath the surface, the machine had already adjusted. It no longer asked who was loudest. It only checked what was true. On the evening, the strategist presented a refined version of the architecture to the board. Applause filled the room. The chief executive leaned back, satisfied. A future had been named. She stood at the back, hands folded, face calm. In the reflection of the screen, her eyes did not waver. They believed they had taken something from her. They did not realize they had taken everything that would later refuse to work without her. The clause did not exist on paper. That was its power. It was born in silence, late at night, when the building had emptied and ambition slept in other offices. She sat alone, the glow of her screen cutting through the dark, watching the final draft of the acquisition contract breathe line by line. This was the deal everyone talked about in whispers, the one that would crown careers, the one they believed she was lucky to witness. They did not know she was shaping its spine. She moved slowly at first, carefully, like a surgeon tracing the outline of a body before the first incision. The contract was dense, layered with contingencies and cross-references designed to impress regulators and intimidate anyone who tried to read it too closely. To most eyes, it was complete. To hers, it was unfinished. She did not add a loophole. Loopholes invite scrutiny. She added a condition. Buried beneath formatting and metadata, beyond the reach of PDF viewers and casual audits, she embedded a verification requirement tied not to role or title, but to origin. Not ownership as the board understood it, authorship as the system defined it. The rule was simple. No contract could complete execution without confirmation from the architect who built the framework it relied upon. It was not malicious. It was precise. She tested it against internal simulations. Each time, the system responded without complaint, as if relieved to be asked a question that finally made sense. The clause did not announce itself. It waited invisible lawful absolute. Around her, the company accelerated. Meetings multiplied. The strategist's voice grew louder, more confident. He spoke openly now about closing timelines and integration plans, about how smoothly everything would run once the deal was signed. He spoke as if the architecture were already his. She listened without correcting him. The chief executive praised decisiveness. He complained about delays. Investors circled dates on calendars. The pressure condensed into urgency, and urgency has a way of flattening curiosity. When the system prompted for secondary verification during a routine review, he clicked through without reading. He trusted speed more than structure. In that moment, he linked his signature to hers. The system acknowledged the connection instantly. Dual validation established, ownership chains synchronized. To him, it was a checkbox cleared. To the machine, it was a truth recorded. She felt it when it happened. A subtle shift in the audit trail that settled like a final breath. Not triumph, certainty. From then on, there was no path forward without her presence, even if they removed her name from the door. The irony lay not in what she had taken, but in what he had given without knowing. The strategist continued to strip attribution from files, unaware that each attempt deepened the bind. Every copied framework carried the condition forward. Every edit reinforced the dependency. He was not erasing her. He was replicating her authority into places he believed were his own. When she looked at him now, she saw something different. Not a rival, a vector. In private moments, doubt brushed the edges of her resolve, not fear of consequence, but grief. She had built this company to endure, not collapse. She had believed in its promise long before it learned to believe in itself. The clause was not revenge. It was a mirror, a demand that the truth be acknowledged before progress could continue. On the eve of the signing, she reviewed the contract one final time, every semicolon intact, every safeguard aligned. The clause rested quietly where she had placed it, indistinguishable from necessity. She closed the file and leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling where reflections of server lights flickered like distant stars. Somewhere down the hall, the strategist laughed with colleagues, already celebrating a victory he did not yet understand. Somewhere else, the chief executive rehearsed his remarks, confident the story would unfold as planned. None of them sensed the weight beneath their feet. Power, she had learned, was not about stopping motion. It was about defining the terms under which motion remained possible. When she left the office that night, the city hummed with anticipation. Screens glowed, markets slept lightly. The future felt decided to everyone who mattered. She walked into the elevator, carrying nothing visible, her expression calm, her steps unhurried. The clause traveled with her, not as a document, but as a fact. They believed they had written her out of the deal. They had, without realizing it, written the deal in her name. They applauded the wrong person. That was the moment the erasure became public. The auditorium glowed with celebration, lights softened to flatter faces and blur edges. A banner stretched across the stage, announcing a new chapter, a future distilled into slogans that sounded bold and meant nothing. Rows of chairs filled with executives, partners, and carefully selected employees who had learned when to clap and when to stay quiet. She sat near the aisle, posture straight, hands folded, eyes steady. From a distance, she looked like part of the audience. From closer, she looked like a witness. The strategist stepped onto the stage to a surge of applause. He smiled broadly, the kind of smile practiced in mirrors and rewarded in rooms like this. His suit was flawless, his confidence rehearsed. He thanked the board, the chief executive, the teams who had made everything possible. He spoke of momentum, of leadership, of vision. He did not look at her. The chief executive followed, voice warm, expansive. He spoke about trust and transition, about how the company was entering a phase that required new energy. He praised collaboration while rewriting history in real time. When he mentioned her, it was as a footnote, a courtesy delivered quickly so the narrative could move on. She has been instrumental, he said. She will assist during the transition. Transition. The word landed like a lid closing. Around her, people nodded sympathetically, offering glances that felt like condolences disguised as respect. Some whispered her name softly, as if volume might change outcome. Others avoided her gaze entirely. It was easier not to see someone being replaced when the replacement looked so certain. On stage, the strategist accepted his role with practiced humility. He promised continuity, he promised excellence, he promised results. Each promise rested on architecture he did not understand and authority he did not possess. She watched his hands as he gestured. They were confident hands, untested hands. The applause swelled again. Cameras flashed. The room breathed approval. Inside her, something settled. This was not shock. Shock had passed weeks ago. The first time she saw her work spoken aloud by another mouth, this was recognition. The final confirmation that silence would not protect her. Only structure would. As the ceremony continued, memories threaded quietly through her awareness. Nights alone in server rooms. The smell of ozone and burnt coffee. The weight of responsibility carried without title or applause. She remembered promises spoken casually and forgotten easily. She remembered believing that contribution was enough. It never had been. When the lights dimmed for a video montage, she stood and slipped out, moving with the flow of people rising for refreshments. No one stopped her. No one asked where she was going. That, too, was part of the erasure. In the hallway, the sound changed. Applause became muffled. Celebration thinned into echoes. She leaned briefly against the cool glass wall, steadying herself, not from weakness, but from the clarity that can feel like loss before it feels like power. Behind the scenes, the strategist laughed with board members, flushed with triumph. He believed the hardest part was over. He believed recognition equaled control. He believed proximity to the stage meant ownership of the script. The chief executive watched him with satisfaction. The succession looked clean. The optics were perfect. The company appeared decisive. Neither of them noticed the absence she left behind. They mistook quiet for consent. Later, in her office, she found the envelope waiting on her desk. No sender, no explanation. Inside, a single printed agenda for the coming week. Meetings she was no longer invited to. Decisions already made. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in her bag. Anger flickered briefly, sharp and tempting. She let it pass. Anger would have asked for justice. She was already holding it. That evening, as the building emptied again, she returned to her desk and opened the system logs. The architecture pulsed calmly, unchanged by ceremonies and speeches. It recognized her as it always had. The truth did not applaud. It persisted. She thought of the strategist on stage, basking in borrowed certainty. She thought of the chief executive, confident he had managed risk by managing people. They believed they had removed a variable. They had not understood what she was. She closed the terminal and turned off the lights. The server glow lingered, steady and patient. Somewhere deep within the framework, the condition she had written waited, untouched by applause, indifferent to titles. They had given her a seat in the audience. They did not realize she still controlled the ending. The badge deactivated before the sentence finished. That was how they told her she no longer existed. The boardroom was colder than it had ever been, air conditioning tuned to precision rather than comfort. Glass walls reflected faces that refused to meet hers, multiplying the moment into something larger than it needed to be. She stood at the far end of the table, hands relaxed at her sides, while the chief executive adjusted his tie as if preparing for a photograph. "This is effective immediately," the human resources director said, voice steady in a way that betrayed rehearsal. A thin folder slid across the table, stopping just short of her reach. Severance terms, access revocation, a clean ending, packaged neatly. No one said thank you. The strategist watched from his seat, posture straight, expression carefully neutral. Relief flickered through him before he could suppress it. This was the final step. Once she was gone, the system would be his in practice as well as in name. He believed the risk had been removed. She felt the soft vibration at her hip as the badge went dark. Somewhere in the building, a door she had opened every morning for over a decade silently rejected her. The sound was small. Final, for a brief moment, memory tried to intrude. The first day she walked into this room, when it still smelled like fresh paint. The first contract she saved at 3 a.m, the promises spoken casually and forgotten easily. She pushed them aside. This moment did not belong to the past. The chief executive cleared his throat. "Security will escort you after the signing," he said, already turning toward the investors seated along the wall. "We'll proceed without interruption." Without her. The words settled into the room like dust. She nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. Words would have invited debate. Debate would have suggested uncertainty. She gathered her belongings with measured precision, notebook pen. The small photograph she kept tucked inside, unseen by anyone who never asked. No one offered help. No one met her eyes. As she turned toward the door, her phone vibrated. Just once. A private signal, subtle enough to be mistaken for imagination. She glanced down, heart steady, breath unchanged. Author verification window initiated. The system had noticed. She did not smile. She did not slow. The plot twist had already occurred, and none of them were watching the right screen. In the hallway, footsteps echoed behind her as security caught up, awkward and apologetic. They had escorted executives out before, but never someone who walked like this, calm and unhurried, as if she were leaving by choice. One of them opened the door for her, eyes downcast. "Thank you," she said softly, and meant it. Inside the boardroom, the strategist leaned forward, eager now. He believed the hardest part was over. He did not see the faint notification that appeared briefly on the main system monitor before disappearing again. He did not hear the internal clock begin its count. 60 minutes. The chief executive smiled at the investors, confident the disruption had been contained. He spoke of professionalism, of focus, of momentum. He did not feel the shift beneath his feet. She stepped into the elevator alone. The doors slid shut, sealing the sound of voices and plans behind her. In the mirrored steel, her reflection looked unchanged. Same posture, same calm. Only the context had moved. As the elevator descended, the system began its quiet work. It searched for the biometric confirmation it required. It searched for the author it recognized. It found absence. Absence was not an error. Absence was a condition. Across the building, screens continued to glow with confidence. Calendars remained marked. Agendas stayed intact. No alarms sounded. No warnings flashed. That was the elegance of it. Outside, the city breathed around her. Unaware, traffic moved. People hurried. Life continued without pausing for corporate rituals. She stepped into the open air, adjusting her coat, feeling the weight lift not as relief, but as clarity. They believed termination meant erasure. They believed removing her access removed her authority. They had confused presence with power. Behind her, unseen and unquestioned, the system continued counting, not down, forward, each second moving them closer to a truth they had signed without reading. She walked away without looking back. The ending, she knew, was already in motion. The screen turned red 8 seconds after they believed they had won. Applause died mid-breath. From the marble lobby below, the signing streamed across a wall of glass, delayed just enough to feel unreal. The woman stood among employees who had gathered to watch history behave itself. She blended into the crowd, posture calm, face composed, a witness again. Above them, the boardroom glowed like a stage. Lights softened edges. Cameras loved the angle. On screen, the chief executive stood center frame, suit pressed, voice smooth. He spoke about a new era, about integrity and momentum, about how the company had earned this moment. The strategist hovered a step behind him, smiling too wide, hands folded like a man already practicing ownership. The digital stylus hovered. The company seal pulsed, 8 seconds of perfection. Then the background flickered. Once, twice a ripple ran through the image like a breath taken by something alive. Authorization error. The words appeared clean and clinical, white against crimson. Primary author not found. Contract verification failed. The room upstairs froze. On the screen, the chief executive's smile stiffened, his hand still extended in a gesture that no longer made sense. The strategist leaned forward, confusion flashing across his face, before discipline smothered it. A murmur spread through the boardroom, low at first, then rising, a sound made of disbelief. In the lobby, people shifted. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered that it had to be a glitch. The woman did not move. She felt no rush, no triumph, only confirmation. Upstairs, voices overlapped. Reload the system. Run the patch. Check the connection. The strategist's fingers flew across a keyboard, confidence cracking into urgency. He tried again. The screen refreshed. Authorization error. The words returned, unchanged. Merciless in their consistency, the chief executive turned toward the cameras, reflexively reaching for control. "We're experiencing a brief technical issue," he said, voice tight but trained. "Our team is resolving it." The microphones were still live. "This is not a sync problem," someone said off camera. "It's authorship." The strategist's face drained of color. He stared at the monitor, then at the chief executive, then back again. "It's pulling from the compliance ledger," he whispered. Panic finally breaking through. "It's searching for biometric confirmation." Confirmation from whom? In the lobby, the woman lowered her phone, the feed reflecting crimson across her knuckles. Around her, employees leaned closer to the screen, hunger replacing celebration. When history falters, people want to see the fracture. Upstairs, the board erupted. Chairs scraped. An investor stood, voice sharp. "How did you miss this?" Another demanded answers that did not exist. The strategist typed faster, sweat beading at his temples. He tried to override the protocol. The system responded instantly. Replication detected, external compliance node synchronized. The strategist froze. "It mirrored," he said, barely audible. "It's already logged." Silence fell hard. The kind that follows an irreversible sound. The chief executive's jaw clenched. "Shut it down." "We can't," the strategist said, louder now, desperation replacing bravado. "Once it's mirrored, it's permanent. Any attempt to bypass flags as fraud." The red banner expanded, filling the screen. Transaction invalid, verification conflict detected. In the lobby, a woman near the front covered her mouth. "What's happening?" she asked no one. The woman beside her did not answer. On screen, the chief executive searched for words and found none that could change reality. Either one. Reporters raised cameras again. The room had turned from ceremony to evidence. The system refreshed one final time. Owner of record identified. The name appeared beneath the error, precise and unadorned. The strategist staggered back as if struck. It's verifying the original architect, he said, voice breaking. The chain goes straight to her credentials. There is no override. The chief executive shook his head, disbelief hardening into fear. That's impossible. But impossibility had never concerned the machine. Only truth had. In the lobby, the woman slipped her phone into her coat. She felt neither joy nor anger. The storm had arrived exactly where it was meant to land. Around her, whispers ignited. Who is that? She just stopped a deal worth billions. How did this happen? She stepped away from the crowd as the screen continued to bleed red. Above her, the boardroom unraveled in full view of the world. Below her, the building held its breath. She walked toward the exit, heels quiet on stone, heart steady. The system did not need her presence to speak anymore. It had already said what mattered. They had tried to sign without the truth. The truth had declined. The market bled before noon. Phones began ringing at the same time. The boardroom fell silent. Inside the glass tower, confidence evaporated in layers. What had been applause minutes earlier curdled into panic, sharp and contagious. Screens refreshed too quickly to follow. Numbers dropped, stabilized, then dropped again, each update carving another piece from certainty. No alarms sounded, no evacuation orders were given. This was not a fire. It was something colder. In the boardroom, the chief executive stood frozen as the implications caught up with him. Investors spoke at once now, voices overlapping, no longer careful to hide frustration. One demanded explanations, another demanded accountability, a third demanded distance. The strategist sat rigid, staring at his laptop as if proximity might coax it into obedience. It did not. By the time the first legal team called, the truth had already traveled. Compliance feeds mirrored the failure outward, not as rumor, but as record. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had told the truth to anyone with authority to hear it. Someone said the words out loud at last. This has hit the regulator. The room shifted. Fear took shape. The strategist's fingers hovered uselessly above the keys. He had tried everything he knew. Overrides, patches, escalations. Each attempt only reinforced the lock. The deeper he pushed, the more the system insisted on verification. It was not broken. It was waiting. Who is the author? An investor demanded. Who owns this contract? No one answered immediately. When the name surfaced, it did so without drama. A line of text on a mirrored compliance screen. Clean, unambiguous line. The strategist read it once, then again, as if repetition might change the letters. That's not possible, the chief executive said, voice strained. Her access was terminated. Access is not authorship, the legal counsel replied quietly. The chain recognizes origin, not employment. Silence followed heavy final. In the minutes that followed, value evaporated. Analysts recalculated. Partners froze transactions. The deal that had defined their future now defined their risk. A message appeared across internal dashboards, simple and devastating. Contract source invalid pending author confirmation. Somewhere else in the building, people watched the ticker turn red, numbers sliding downward in disbelief. Careers reshaped themselves in real time. Blame began to look for places to land. In the boardroom, the chief executive leaned forward, palms flat against the table. Find her, he said. It was not a request. Get her on the line. She is no longer on the network, someone replied. The strategist swallowed hard. For the first time, he understood what he had mistaken for silence. It had never been absence. It had been restraint. Outside the building, the woman walked without urgency. The city continued around her. Indifferent, cars moved, screens flashed, life proceeded without regard for corporate implosions. Her phone vibrated once. Then again, messages stacked quickly, unread. Inside the tower, panic accelerated. Legal teams argued about exposure. Communications drafted statements that explained nothing. The chief executive tried to regain control through volume, through authority, through habit. None of it mattered. The system refreshed. Ownership verification confirmed. The strategist slumped back in his chair, breath shallow. He had believed control came from visibility. He had believed proximity to power equaled possession of it. He had never understood the difference between touching a system and being recognized by it. An investor stood, chair scraping loudly. You did not verify authorship, he said, not as accusation, but as verdict. You signed blind. The words landed with weight. In another room, a screen displayed the compliance ledger updating across jurisdictions. The failure was no longer internal. It was public, permanent. There would be inquiries. There would be consequences. The chief executive felt something unravel in his chest. He had built his authority on certainty, on the illusion that control flowed downward. He had never imagined that something beneath him could refuse. Across the city, the woman paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. She felt the phone vibrate again. She did not answer. Not yet. She knew what they were realizing. They had not lost a deal. They had lost the assumption that power belonged to those who spoke the loudest. When the light changed, she crossed the street calmly. Behind her, unseen but irrevocable, the system continued to speak in a language that could not be negotiated with. The reckoning had begun, not with a confrontation, but with a record. And records, once written, do not forget. The confirmation arrived without ceremony. By the time they understood what it meant, control was already gone. In a room far quieter than the boardroom had ever been, regulators watched the ledger settle. No applause, no raised voices, just the soft cadence of keys and the steady glow of screens as records aligned themselves with truth. The chain did not argue. It verified. Inside the tower, panic tried to dress itself as procedure. Legal counsel spoke in careful phrases, each word weighed for liability. Communications drafted statements that promised cooperation while saying nothing at all. The chief executive paced, suit jacket abandoned, authority fraying at the edges. He had spent years mastering rooms. This room did not care. The strategist sat apart, shoulders rounded now, eyes fixed on a single line that refused to change. Owner of record confirmed. Original architect verified. He read it again, then again. Searching for a loophole that did not exist, his confidence had always depended on momentum. The ledger did not move for confidence. Someone asked the question everyone had avoided. If she is the author, a board member said slowly, what does that make us? The answer came not from the table, but from the screen. Ownership chains synchronized. Modification without biometric approval prohibited. The words were precise, unemotional, final. The chief executive felt the room tilt-touncing. He had believed authority flowed from position, from titles printed on doors and announced on stages. He had never imagined a system that recognized a person rather than a role. He opened his mouth to speak, to reframe, to assert relevance. The ledger refreshed. Transfer acknowledged. The strategist stood abruptly, chair scraping. This can be appealed, he said, voice thin. There has to be a process. There was a process. Legal counsel replied, not unkindly. It was followed. Across the city, the woman sat in a small, sunlit room she had chosen because it was quiet. Her phone rested on the table beside a cooling cup of coffee. She had watched the messages arrive in waves, each more urgent than the last. Requests, demands, invitations framed as apologies. She waited. When the call finally came, it did not come from the tower. A measured voice introduced itself as counsel for the acquiring firm. Respect threaded through the words now unmistakable. He spoke of reopening discussions, of continuity, of leadership under verified authorship. He did not mention the collapse. He did not need to. She listened without interruption, eyes tracing the light on the wall. When he finished, silence stretched long enough to feel deliberate. Send the terms, she said at last. Her voice was calm, not triumphant. Precise. The call ended. Back in the tower, the chief executive learned what it felt like to be irrelevant. Partners suspended talks, analysts revised projections with brutal efficiency. The story shifted, not with spectacle, but with consensus. Authority drained away from those who had mistaken proximity for ownership. A statement appeared from regulators later that afternoon. It was brief, factual. It confirmed authorship and ownership according to immutable records. Any modification without verified approval would be considered void. The market responded not with panic, but with acceptance. The strategist watched his future narrow to a footnote. He had believed visibility created permanence. He had never learned the difference between being seen and being recorded. The chief executive resigned before sunset, citing personal reasons that convinced no one. His departure was quiet, almost polite. The building absorbed it without comment. The woman closed her laptop and sat back. For the first time in years, the weight in her chest lifted not as relief, but as balance restored. She felt no urge to celebrate. Celebration belonged to those who needed witnesses. This was something else. In the days that followed, Her name appeared where it had always belonged, in filings, in ledgers, in quiet acknowledgments that did not ask for forgiveness. She ignored most of the noise. She focused on the work. A new draft arrived that evening, clean and respectful. It recognized her role without ornament. It asked for approval rather than assuming it. She read every line. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to reversals of fortune. Inside the systems she had built, order returned, not because someone demanded it, but because truth had been allowed to stand. They had tried to remove her to preserve control. They had discovered that control had never been theirs. When she signed the new agreement, she did so without hastily. The system responded instantly. Verification complete, chain intact, no fanfare, no banners. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the architect had always been present. And that presence, once recognized, did not need to shout to be absolute. The world did not end when the noise stopped. It simply became quieter than anyone expected. Morning light spilled across the floor of a modest office that overlooked no skyline of power, no glass towers of ambition. The woman sat alone at a clean table, hands wrapped around a warm cup, listening to the city breathe. Traffic hummed. A distant siren rose and faded. Life continued, unburdened by the collapse that had consumed so many screens the night before. This was the first twist no one had predicted. Victory did not arrive with applause. It arrived with stillness. Days had passed since the ledger settled, since ownership aligned itself with truth and refused to move again. Headlines had come and gone, each louder than the last, each searching for villains and heroes. Analysts debated numbers, commentators argued narratives. None of it touched her. She had already stepped beyond the frame they were fighting to define. Her inbox remained full. Invitations from firms that had once ignored her, requests framed as opportunities. Apologies disguised as strategy. She read them carefully, not with suspicion, but with clarity. Power revealed itself not in who spoke the loudest now, but in who waited to be invited. She chose silence. In another part of the city, the old tower carried on without its former certainty. Offices were rearranged. Titles disappeared from directories. Names were removed quietly, without ceremony. Those who had once controlled rooms learned how small rooms could feel when authority drained away. The strategist packed his desk under watchful eyes. He told himself stories about timing and bad luck, about misunderstandings and unfair systems. Somewhere beneath the excuses, a truth pressed uncomfortably close. He had mistaken access for ownership. He had confused proximity with authorship. The former chief executive watched the building one last time from the back of a car, glass reflecting a man he barely recognized. He had built an empire on a momentum and belief, never noticing the foundation beneath him because it never demanded attention. When it finally spoke, it did not shout, it simply refused to move. That refusal changed everything. Back in the quiet office, the woman opened her laptop and reviewed a document that had arrived without fanfare. No slogans, no grand promises, just clean language, respectful terms, acknowledgement written plainly where it belonged, independent oversight, verified authorship, final authority. She read every line slowly, not because she doubted it, but because she honored the process that had been denied to her for so long. Each sentence felt balanced. Each clause stood on its own. When she signed, she did so with a steady hand, not out of pride, but out of peace. The system responded instantly. Verification complete, chain intact, no banners unfurled, no notifications rang. The machine did not celebrate. It simply recorded what had always been true. Later, she walked through a nearby park, leaves shifting gently underfoot. Children laughed somewhere beyond the trees. A dog tugged at its leash, impatient with stillness. She breathed deeply, feeling the absence of armor she had worn for years without realizing it. This was the final transformation. Not from powerless to powerful, but from guarded to whole. She thought of the nights she had stayed late, believing endurance would earn protection. She thought of the silence she had accepted as the cost of belonging. She understood now that dignity does not arrive when others grant it. It arrives when truth is designed to endure without permission. Justice, she had learned, does not roar. It corrects. As evening settled, she returned home and turned on a single lamp. The light was soft enough. She closed her laptop and let the quiet fill the room, not as absence, but as proof that nothing was left to defend. Before sleep, she paused, considering the reach of what had happened. Somewhere, someone would recognize their own silence in this story. Someone else would feel the weight of being erased and believe it was permanent. It was not. If this story spoke to you, if you have ever watched your work carry someone else's name, take a moment and share your experience. Leave a comment. Let the quiet victories be seen. If you believe integrity outlasts power, tap like and pass the story to someone who needs the reminder. And if you want more stories where truth survives being ignored, subscribe and stay. Some systems remember. Some stories need to be told.